Sheena instead of Shilonen or Pyro MC instead of Bennett, as they both are free. Obviously, if you have to do this, Mavuika's teams will drop in performance compared to her better options, but since Mavuika's numbers are so high since she's a newly released character, even with her less optimal teams, she should still be enough to clear Abyss. To wrap this up, here are some extensive Mavuika main DPS team calculations done by Hyperwebster. Most of the teams I highlighted are calced here, along with detailing the specific builds, rotations, and assumptions used. Huge thanks to Hyperwebster for doing all of this great work and allowing me to showcase his calcs here. There is a lot of detailed info, so definitely feel free to pause to take a closer look. He also added some personal notes on these teams on the bottom, and one thing he said which I want to highlight is that the amount of fighting spirit a team can generate can differ in practice, especially for non-Shilonen teams. You may end in Abyss Chamber early with fewer fighting spirit and have to spend extra time generating more stacks for your next rotation, or you may extend your original rotation, allowing for more fighting spirit on your next rotation. Thus, in practice, teams may perform better or worse than on paper. Next, off-field support Mavuika teams. Mavuika still likes having other non-long characters like Sitlali and Shilonen since her burst is still important as a support. However, the main point of contention is using Mavuika or Xiangling as your off-field pyro applicator. Mavuika applies AoE pyro off-field every 2 seconds. This is not as much pyro as what Xiangling can provide with Pyro NATO. However, this doesn't make Mavuika bad as a support. In many teams that need off-field pyro application, they don't actually need that much, and thus Mavuika's pyro application is perfectly fine. So in these teams, Mavuika is a Xiangling alternative or upgrade because she deals similar or more damage, especially if you can react her burst, has a buff to the active character with her A4 passive, can provide even more buffs with 4P scroll if she uses it, and can play with shorter rotation times compared to the forced 20-second rotation of Pyro NATO. On top of that, Mavuika brings huge quality of life because her off-field pyro just comes from the top of her skill, so you don't have to worry about batterying a 300 ER Xiangling. A lot of good DPSs are looking to get sizable buffs with the release of Mavuika. First, Knight teams are getting buffed, as along with the release of Pyro Traveler, Knight teams are finally getting a holder of 4P scroll. Mavuika will be better than Pyro Traveler in a burning team since she does more damage and provides more buffs, but both are still good. With burning teams, Mavuika can't reactivate 4P scroll on second rotation onwards since she can't trigger another reaction, but even with this uptime problem, assuming no multi-wave or boss phasing, scroll is still good. Also, using Mavuika's long animation burst can steal Bennett uptime from Knight, but this isn't really a problem since Mavuika's burst deals good damage. For non-Emily havers, you can use Farina instead, but Knight will lose potential skill cast. Two surprisingly better options is using either Sitlali or Auroron. These teams can maintain more burning uptime for more Knight skills, and for teams using Sitlali, you can perform a rotation where Mavuika can melt her burst for a large source of nuke damage. Hyperwebster has also calced various Knight teams with Mavuika along with current Knight teams without her, so again, big thanks to him for allowing me to showcase his calcs. Big takeaway here is that Mavuika is generally just a strict upgrade for Knight over his current best teams. Chaska teams are also looking to get buffed with Mavuika. If we build off of Chaska's current best C0 team, Mavuika will be an upgrade over Auroron as a scroll user, as she brings more personal damage and allows Mavuika to focus purely on vapes. You generally won't be replacing Bennett with Mavuika, so not all of Chaska's teammates will be different elements, resulting in her charged attacks receiving less damage bonus and losing a bullet from her A1 passive. Despite this, it's still an upgrade in damage. For a similar reason, using Sitlali over Farina makes the team even better, allowing Chaska to focus on melts and allowing Mavuika to melt her burst as well. Here are some extensive Chaska team calcs with builds, rotations, and assumptions made by Sensi, another theory crafter who has done a lot of good work on Chaska ever since her beta, so huge thanks to him for allowing me to showcase his calcs. Included are C0 Chaska calcs, C0 calcs with an optimized 5 charged attack Chaska rotation, and calcs with C1 Chaska. Feel free to pause to take a closer look. Big takeaway here is that again, Mavuika looks to be a strict upgrade from current Chaska teams. Next, Molani teams are getting a buff with one caveat. In teams where Molani is paired with another Hydro support that applies a lot of Hydro like Farina, Yelan, or C6 Candice, Mavuika's pyro application is not enough for Molani and you'll have to use Xiangling. However, these are not the only Molani teams out there, and in those teams, Mavuika buffs Molani with more team damage and with better quality of life pyro application. Also, Molani's front-loaded nature appreciates Mavuika's front-loaded A4 buff, and Mavuika having another source of nuke damage is a plus as well. As I go over the best Molani Mavuika teams, I will showcase calcs done by theory crafter Vonfi, who has done extensive and detailed calcs on Molani since her beta, so big thanks to him for allowing me to showcase his calcs. Double Hydro Molani teams are still possible with a Hydro teammate like C5 and below Candice that doesn't apply that much Hydro to ensure that Mavuika's pyro application is reserved for Molani vapes. Similarly, Mona also works as a solid solid Mulaney buffer because she doesn't apply that much hydro, allowing Mavuika to still function for Mulaney. Moving away from double hydro, you can use an animal support like Sucrose instead. Although her buffs don't last long enough to buff all of Mulaney's attacks, some of them do still get buffed, and buffs are buffs nevertheless. For both a safe and solid option for damage, you can run Zhongli for a double Geo support comp. Zhongli's red shred from his shield is helpful, he can hold 4-piece Petra, and most importantly, the shield will make playing Mulaney very comfortable. Lastly, for a theoretical high damage Mulaney team on paper, you can consider using Citlali. Now this team is quite complex because it requires Citlali to not be completely leveled and ignores activating her off-field cryo application. This is to ensure that Mavuika melts her burst and that there isn't any cryo left to mess up Mulaney vaping from Mavuika's pyro application, allowing Citlali to buff both Mulaney's and Mavuika's damage. Because this team is a bit unintuitive and precise, I wouldn't recommend this team for general play, but for those looking to really optimize, consider trying it out. Notlon DPSs aren't the only ones getting buffed by Mavuika. Navia double pyro with Shilonin will be better with Mavuika over Xiangling, as Mavuika provides an additional buff from her A4 and more personal damage. In fact, it's likely better to play this team as a dual carry comp instead, focusing on on-fielding Mavuika and swapping every so often for Navia skill nukes. Cloran also works well with Mavuika in Chevre's overload teams. With Mavuika's presence, Auroran's kit works without electrocharge and can be the 4-piece scroll user, allowing Mavuika to run Codex for her personal damage. And Cloran herself can help generate fighting spirit for Mavuika because she deals normal tank damage. Wriothesley is also looking to benefit from Mavuika. You can't play Wriothesley with Mavuika in Vape Melt, but she works in normal melt teams with Shitlonin or Citlali, or burn melt teams with Emily. Ganyu, however, is a bit different. Because her aim shots can be shot faster than 2 seconds, you kinda need burn melt for Mavuika to work. But the biggest problem is that if you run Mavuika, you're likely not running a shield without losing an important buffer. You can still make it work though. If you play mono pyro teams with DPSs like Arlecchino and Linny, Mavuika should be a slight upgrade over Xiangling with her extra A4 buff and personal damage. There are plenty of other DPSs I haven't mentioned that can make Mavuika work as a support in their teams. Units like Neuvillette and Hu Tao can just insert Mavuika into their team and they should function fine. Mavuika may not necessarily be the best option for these units, but she will work nevertheless. However, the two characters that I want to highlight where you shouldn't play Mavuika over someone like Xiangling are Child and Raiden. Child really wants Xiangling so that his hydro application can drive Pyronado vapes, and Raiden's kit is anti-synergistic with Mavuika's. Mavuika doesn't use energy, so Raiden's energy refund from her burst doesn't work for her, and because Mavuika's burst doesn't have an energy cost, she gives no resolve stacks for Raiden. To conclude this Mavuika guide, I wanted to share my analysis on her place in the meta in terms of overall strength and pull value. As the Pyro Archon, it is fitting that Mavuika is looking like a really strong character, being both a top meta Pyro main DPS and a top meta Pyro off-field support. The main playstyle that I think most people will focus on is Mavuika as a main DPS, since that's where you'll get all the big numbers. With Mavuika's best main DPS team alongside Citlali, Shilonin, and Bennett, on paper, this is the highest damaging team in the game. The best teams from current top DPSs like Neuvillette and Arlecchino are under Mavuika's top team, assuming equal investment. And even if you don't have both Citlali and Shilonin, as long as you have one of them, you can make a very strong Mavuika team that is among the best teams in the game. Now of course, damage numbers aren't everything. Mavuika is more reliant on specific teammates as she depends on activating her burst and triggering reactions like Vape and Melt to reach her high damage numbers. In contrast, both Neuvillette and Arlecchino aren't burst reliant and don't necessarily need to be played in reaction-based teams, allowing their rotations to be more flexible in multi-wave scenarios. And while both Neuvillette and Arlecchino are also reliant on specific teammates, as Neuvillette without Farina and Arlecchino without Bennett will deal significantly less damage, they aren't as reliant on them and will perform better on their own. And of course, in the case of Neuvillette, the main reason he's currently considered the best DPS is that he's easy to play, has self-healing, and his attacks have large AoE. But Mavuika does have her share of quality of life. Her burst gives her on-fielding 100% resistance to interruption for 7 seconds, her motorcycle charged attacks have a large AoE, and unlike Arlecchino, she can get healed by 2 healers in her best teams. On top of that, Mavuika is arguably the easiest DPS to play out of all 3, as after you set up your supports and swap to Mavuika to burst and on-field, all you have to do is hold down the attack button once to perform her motorcycle charged attacks. So with her quality of life and her high damage numbers in her best teams, I can easily see the argument for Mavuika being the new best DPS in the game. But regardless on how you view the top DPS comparisons, it is undeniable based on the numbers that Mavuika will be joining Neuvillette and Arlecchino as one of the best carries in the game. Since Mavuika is another Pyro on-fielder, the best comparison for this role is with Arlecchino. Both are very strong carries in all types of Pyro teams such as Vape, Melt, Monopyro, and Chevre's Overload. The main distinctions between the two at equal investment is that Mavuika will generally perform better in reaction-based teams like Vape and Mill, while Arlecchino will perform better in non-reaction teams like Shove vs Overload and Monopyro. Mavuika is more burst and team reliant, while Arlecchino works better in multi-wave and solo scenarios. However, the damage difference between the two carries isn't that massive. Arlecchino is still very strong in Vape and Mill, and Mavuika is still very strong in Shove vs Overload and Monopyro. However, Mavuika has much better quality of life in combat with resistance to interruption, large AoE charge attacks, and the ability to actually get healed in combat. Thus, at equal investment, I do think Mavuika is the overall better DPS. However, when you start considering factors like not having Setlali or Shilonen, or having Arlecchino's signature in constellations while not getting Mavuika's, then Arlecchino will be better. Ultimately, if you already have a pretty invested Arlecchino and are just interested in Mavuika's main DPS potential, Mavuika isn't that valuable of a pull. Arlecchino can do the job just fine. However, Mavuika's kit isn't designed for her to just be another Pyro main DPS. She's also an extremely strong off-field support as well, and I do think people are underestimating Mavuika's strength as a support just due to the fact that her off-field AoE Pyro application is lower than Xiangling's. And although this is true, the reality is that aside from teams like Vape Melt, some Red Melt setups, and Double Hydro Vape, most teams don't need Xiangling's Pyro application to function. Mavuika's AoE Pyro application is perfectly fine for a lot of teams, and in these teams, Mavuika serves as a Xiangling alternative or just a strict upgrade. Mavuika provides more team buffs from her A4 passive, and 4-piece scroll, if you use it on her, can provide as much or even more personal damage for the burst, especially if you react it, and her off-field Pyro application isn't locked behind a 20-second cooldown like Xiangling's, allowing you to play shorter rotations. And most importantly, Mavuika's off-field Pyro application provides much better quality of life for teams as it just comes from her press skill, so you don't have to worry about having enough energy on Xiangling for her burst. So many teams are looking to get buffed by Mavuika's supportive capabilities, including Kaniche, Chaska, Molani, Navia, Cloran, and Risley, and there are many more that will work with Mavuika. All of these strengths do come with a cost. In Mavuika's best teams, she needs to be paired with another Notlun character to generate enough fighting spirit for her burst. Setlali and Shilonen specifically are her best teammates, and ideally you have at least one of them to pair with Mavuika. Shilonen especially for more general teams, while Setlali is specifically for Melt. If you don't have either, your team building options are much more limited, and you will notice a difference in her performance. And while this is a hefty downside in terms of her flexibility, I think it's a worthy price to pay to access Mavuika's power. Mavuika is an Archon that needs to be played around, similar to how you need to have a healer to maximize Furina's fanfare buff, but to a larger extent. And if you're able to meet these team building restrictions, you will be greatly rewarded. If I were to compare the Archons between each other and rank them based on strength and pull value, to me, Furina is still the best Archon. She does damage, provides a large buff, her healer restriction is easily met, and being Hydro just makes her a very general support. Mavuika, however, easily makes the tier below her alongside Nahida and Zhongli to me. Now these three's placements are easily interchangeable depending on how much you value a particular Archon strength. You might really value Nahida's power in Dendro teams like Hyperbloom that are strong, or you may really value the comfort that Zhongli provides to any team with his shield. You can rank all three of these Archons second, third, and fourth and make a solid case for any rank. But because Mavuika's best teams deal top tier damage, she has a ton of quality of life as an on-fielder like large AoE attacks and resistance to interruption, on top of being a strong off-field support, buffing many teams and giving a quality of life upgrade over Xiangling. For these reasons, I do think Mavuika is arguably the second best Archon in the game. In many ways, Mavuika is the modern version of Raiden. Both are Archons with main DPS forms that a team builds around, and both have off-field support capabilities. What makes Mavuika modern is that she just has higher numbers in terms of damage and buffs, and her off-field Pyro application is much more useful than Raiden's off-field Electro application. And to me, this is where Mavuika's pull value lies. You're not just getting another Pyro main DPS with higher numbers. You're pulling for a very strong Pyro main DPS that can also be played as a really strong support, which to me increases her value a lot. Mavuika is a very strong main DPS and support with an extremely high damage ceiling if you have the right pieces to build around her. But even if you don't have her best teammates like Setlali or Shilonen, whether because you skipped them or because you are a newer player, you can still make Mavuika work. For main DPS Mavuika, there are 4-star Notlun support options like Aurora and Gachina. There are also teams with no Notlun supports and you just burst every other rotation, and because Mavuika just has higher numbers at base since she's a newer character, even the more suboptimal teams should be enough for Abyss. And for support Mavuika, you can just use your skill in any team regardless and benefit from its quality of life over Xiangling's burst. I wouldn't call Mavuika a must pull as she does have her flaws like team building restrictions, and I don't think anyone needs to pull for any specific character, but with Mavuika's high damage capabilities as a main DPS and ability to buff many other carries as an off-field support, I think Mavuika will be a great pull for many accounts, whether new or veteran ones. And that's everything I wanted to cover about Mavuika. Because Mavuika is such an important and impactful character as the Pyro Archon, I wanted to make this guide the most comprehensive and detailed guide on the channel yet, and I couldn't have done it without the theory crafters behind the math I showcased in this video. So again, big thanks to Hyperwebster, Sensi, and Vomfi for granting me permission to showcase their calcs. All of them do great TC work. I hope this guide and analysis was helpful to you all in giving you a better understanding of everything related to Mavuika. Just clicking and watching the video helps the channel out immensely, and if you want to show even more support, consider liking or sharing the video, or feel free to click the subscribe button for more pre-release analysis videos in the future. Leave any questions in the comments, and for all of you planning on wishing, I wish you all the best of luck on your Mavuika pulls.